Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Washing Dishes. Today we're going to take some humble ingredients and make a really wonderful date night meal. Hang out, see how it turns out. Today we're going to be making a dish that has several different components, so we're going to get right into it. I'm dicing up some mushrooms that are going to go with fennel and garlic, and we're going to use this as stuffing for our stuffed chicken thigh that's going to be served with some really wonderful and delicious herbed couscous with peas. We're also going to be adding some peas to the stuffing, and I'll show you how to debone the chicken, get the stuffing in, tie it up, and get it seared off and sliced up and presented in an absolutely beautiful way. So, without further ado, let's just hop in. As you can see, I've sliced these thin, and now I'm just running my knife through them in the opposite direction. I'm not going to get exactly perfect little cubes, but these are going to cook down into very small chunks and very small pieces, and the exact size of the knife cuts aren't as relevant. And for the fennel, we're just going to trim off the ends and then cut out the kind of tough parts along the length of the stalks. And then once that's done, we're going to slice them into sticks as best we can, and then we're going to turn those sticks into a small dice. And this is a case like the mushrooms where if your knife cuts aren't like perfectly square and stuff, mine certainly aren't, it's not really going to matter very much. Again, because this is all going to be cooked down and it's going to be inside of a chicken thigh. So it's really not like these knife cuts aren't going to show. I've slowed it down so that you can see I've got my hand in kind of a claw grip, and that's allowing me to run the knife along my front knuckle and go very consistently and very safely through a large stack of stuff that I've got bundled up. And then finally the garlic, we're just going to give these a quick smash, a quick slice nice and thin, and then just run our knife back and forth through it just to get it into, similar size pieces to the fennel and mushrooms. Anytime you're going to be stuffing any sort of raw meat, but especially raw chicken, you want to cook your stuffing in advance so that you don't have to worry about overcooking your protein because you had to cook it long enough to get the stuffing cooked. We're going to avoid that problem by cooking our stuffing in advance. This will also remove pretty much all of the moisture in those vegetables, which will prevent it from making the chicken soggy, and will also mean that those vegetables will absorb some of the moisture as the chicken cooks and releases its liquids. Once the oil in the pan is extremely hot and just starting to smoke, go ahead and add the mushrooms and let them get started. It's going to bring the temperature in the pan down a bit, and we want to give that a chance to recover before we add the other things. Additionally, be aware that mushrooms have a tendency to absorb a lot of fat in the pan, which is fine. You just need to be aware of it and know that sometimes you have to add additional oil later on. I'm adding pepper here to the mushrooms, but I'm not adding any salt just yet. Mushrooms have a lot of moisture, and if we add salt now, that moisture is going to release prematurely, and they will both take longer to cook and not get as good of a kind of sear crust going. Once you can tell the mushrooms have released most of their moisture and they have a good sear on them, you can go ahead and add the fennel to the mix. And this is also a good time to go ahead and add that first dose of salt because, as we mentioned, the fennel will need salt and the mushrooms will have released a fair amount of their liquid. So any additional liquid that the salt causes them to release won't be an issue. One of the things I'm doing here is keeping everything spread out into as thin as a layer as possible so that I can get really good contact with the pan and get as much of a sear as possible. So I'm kind of spreading things out, letting them sit, stirring it around, spreading things out, letting it sit, stirring it around again and again and again. And that's giving all of the different parts of all of the different pieces of the different vegetables a chance to get good contact with the pan and get a good sear on it. And then when things are starting to get close to done, go ahead and pop in the garlic. We're adding this last because it's the smallest pieces, it cooks the fastest, and it is the most sensitive to getting burned. Burned garlic will ruin a dish, and we don't want to risk it. So I've added it in. I'm just going to let it go for, like 30 to 45 seconds. Add a little bit of water to keep things from drying out too much, and then give it a stir. Let that water we added cook off, and we're good to go. Once the garlic smells delicious and everything is nice and soft, go ahead and cut the heat, pop this into a bowl, and then I'm going to add about half a cup of frozen peas to both add them to the dish and to cool this down a little bit quicker. We've got our stuffing ready to go. I'm going to set this aside for a little bit, let it cool off. And while that's cooling off, we're going to deal with our chicken. This is the remaining thigh from the whole chicken we broke down to make stock a couple of weeks ago. Link there, I guess, or maybe down there. We'll figure it out. This one was packaged in a Ziploc bag and wrapped in plastic wrap. So I'm going to dry my hands, don some gloves, and we will break down this chicken. I will be upfront with you. I haven't done this technique since culinary school, so it might take me just a little bit. So we've got our chicken breast that we had wrapped in plastic. The plastic will keep some of the freezer burn off of it, which is really handy, but it's not entirely necessary. As always, we're going to dry it off and then get to butchery. If you look on the back, you can see the leg bone into the thigh bone, and that's what we're going to remove. We're going to keep the skin intact on the front. We're just going to take off the bone from the back, and we're going to start by cutting a slit along the top of the thigh bone and just working our way slowly through and getting down to the bone. And then we're going to do the same thing on the leg. If your knife isn't quite as sharp as you'd like, you might need to make a few tries at it. I need to get this knife sharpened. And it's important anytime you're doing butchery that you work both for safety's sake and for precision's sake in a way that is comfortable for you. Sometimes that makes doing this for camera a little bit difficult, and I will try my best to show you what I'm working on. Now that we've exposed the bones in both the leg and the thigh, as you can see here, we're just kind of pushing the meat away from the bone as best we can, and then we're going to try to work the joint free of the rest of the meat. And we're going to do that by making small, shallow slices around that joint to kind of free up the meat. And then we're going to cut the bottom of the thigh bone free. And that allows us to kind of trim the rest of the meat away from that bone and joint, which will let us then get the joint out and proceed into the leg bone. And now I'm just working around that thigh leg joint, again in shallow, small strokes, trying to do as little damage to the good meat as possible while I get out the bone and fat and tendon that we don't want. And now that I've got it mostly free, I'm going to slide my finger under the bone and then slide my knife in and very carefully cut that joint free. That leaves us the bone and the joint connected just barely to the meat, and we're going to take care of that with our chef's knife. We're going to use, right there, we're going to use the heel of the knife, and we're going to give it one solid whack. And now we have our deboned chicken quarter ready to be stuffed. Go ahead and make sure you didn't leave any pieces of like bone shards or anything like that, and you should be good to go. Now to prepare this for stuffing, I'm just running my knife very shallowly across the meat, making some small cross hatches, and that's going to allow us to press the thicker part of the thigh and leg a little flatter, which gets us a little bit more surface area to fill with stuffing. It's important anytime you're stuffing something to be aware that it's probably going to take a little bit less stuffing to fill it than you expect. I obviously have a little bit too much, and that will become obvious very soon. But to fold it up, we're just going to use the old burrito trick. We're going to pull the back up over the front and tuck the filling in, and you can see this is when it becomes obvious that I have too much. And we're just going to tuck the side in. And roll it the rest of the way over and leave the seam side down on the board. Now we've got to tie it up, and for that I'm going to use this kitchen twine. We're going to start at the top, and we're just going to kind of nudge the string under our roll, and then we're going to tie a surgeon's knot, which is similar to a square knot. We're going to go loop once, tighten it down, and then when we do the second loop for the square knot, we're going to loop one tail over the other on the right and one tail over the other on the left, and then cinch it down. We're going to trim those tails, and then we're just going to do it a few more times to cinch everything up along the whole rest of the chicken thigh and leg. There we go. All nice and tied, and this is going to both keep it from falling apart as we cook it and also keep it in a nice consistent shape so that it cooks evenly throughout the roll. So I'm using a cast iron skillet to cook this because it's handy and I can use it to braise. We're going to start searing this with the seam side down because that'll kind of cause the seam to adhere a little bit better. And now is probably a good time to talk about what a braise actually is. So a braise is a combination of both a dry heat cooking method, which you can see here we're doing essentially a saute on our chicken. But to finish the cooking, we're going to add some stock later, and then we're going to let the chicken thigh and leg cook in the stock for about 20 to 25 minutes after it's already been seared. What that's going to allow us to do is lengthen the cooking time on this thicker piece of meat and ensure that it doesn't dry out. Now, chicken thigh, chicken dark meat, almost never dries out. You'd really have to work at it. But this is another chance to infuse more flavor, give it a better texture, and just make it really extra delicious. And it gets us started on the pan sauce that we're going to use for the final dish. And we're essentially just going to roll our roll around in the pan, making sure that every side is nice and has a good sear on it. And we're less worried about how long that's going to take and more worried about making sure that we get good color and good sear. Now that our chicken has a good sear on it all around, I'm going to go ahead and pull it out of the pan, and I'm going to pour off most of the oil that's in the pan because we don't want that oil in our braise. It would just make it greasy. So once we've got the oil poured off, we're going to go ahead and return the chicken to the pan, and we're going to add a cup and a half of chicken stock and let that go on low heat on a back burner for about 20 to 25 minutes, and we're going to leave that uncovered so that we don't get the chicken skin all sogged out. With our chicken braising, it's time to talk side dishes. The main side dish for this is going to be couscous. I've got 2/3 of a cup here, which is about 2 portions, give or take. We're going to mix that equal parts with water and chicken stock, about 2/3 of a cup. To that, we're going to chop up some beautiful fresh thyme, fresh parsley, and fresh fennel. And we're going to add some peas to that, which is going to kind of carry through the fennel and peas theme that we've got inside the stuffing of our chicken. I'm going to go ahead and get the stock and water heating up, and while that heats up, I'm going to go ahead and chop up our herbs. And we're just going to pile the herbs together with the parsley, fennel, and I'm going to strip the thyme leaves off of the stems. If you get some of the soft stems in there, it's not the end of the world. And then we're just going to run our knife back and forth through them until they're nice and finely chopped. And there we go. These are all ready to add to our couscous and use as a garnish later. Our broth is almost at a boil, so we're going to go ahead and add a few things to our couscous. A little bit of black pepper. Some salt. We'll adjust the salt at the end, just to be sure. I'm going to add most of our fresh herbs, but reserve some. These are going to wilt down a bit when the hot broth goes over it, or the hot stock goes over it. And we want some to be fresh to add in at the end, and we also want some to be fresh to use as a garnish. And I'm going to add about a tablespoon of butter, and that'll melt in the broth, in the stock. So, one moment while I grab our boiling liquid off the stove. Alright, it's just off the boil, and I've got to be quick about it, so I'm going to go ahead and add this in. And then immediately cover it with saran wrap. As nice and tight as we possibly can. And this is just going to steam itself over the course of the next 7 to 10 minutes. So we're going to set this aside. We're going to go check on our chicken and get that sauce ready. Our chicken has finished braising and the sauce has reduced down by quite a bit, so we're ready to go ahead and turn this into a pan sauce. I'm going to strain the cooking liquid through a pretty fine mesh strainer into a small saucepan, or as the Great British Bake Off would say, a saucepan. Straining it like this will catch all of the little bits of filling and chicken fat that have rendered off and fallen out. And then we're going to add some butter to really, really make this sauce super rich and delicious and viscous and spectacular. And we're talking like probably about a tablespoon and a half of butter, and we're just going to swirl that around so that the butter slowly melts and emulsifies into the sauce and makes that sauce super rich and creamy instead of making it kind of greasy and gross.
Well, as Kronk would say, it's all coming together. We've got our chicken, we've got our couscous, we've got our pan sauce, we've got our herbs. Let's get ready. So, let's give this a slice. Get the string off. Alright, that's enough for one plate. Set that to the side. For the couscous, we'll take a fork, give it a fluff, make sure there aren't any clumps, give it a quick taste. Needs a little salt. And we'll add some of our herbs, nice and fresh. This is very hot, hang on, let me add the peas and cool it down. Once you've got the peas in, it's important to be very gentle with your stirring. You could do this in a larger bowl if you were so inclined. There we go. Let's plate it up. It's important to tidy it up a little. Beautiful, beautiful. And then our beautiful, beautiful pan sauce. We're just going to do a little swipe here, a little swipe here, and then a little drizzle right over the top. Sprinkle on a few fresh herbs, and there we have it. A beautiful date night chicken dish fit for the best lady in your life, or a gentleman, or they, them, or whoever you happen to be cooking dinner to impress. Have a wonderful rest of your time zone, and let me know how it turns out for you.